Arizona Territory, spring of 1883. The sun was high and hard, glaring down on the red clay streets of Clearwater, when they dragged Pruella Vaughn off her wagon and threw her into a jail cell for a crime she did not commit. Her hands were scraped from the struggle. She had been trying to calm the mule when the deputy rode up with a shotgun and a warrant for horse theft. She had not run. She had not argued. She had only asked one question, voice low and even. "Whose horse?" The name they gave was a rancher from 2 towns over. She had never met him. Pruella sat on the edge of the cot behind iron bars, wrists aching from the ropes they had only just untied. Her skirts were dusted red. She was 30, alone, and far from anyone who might testify for her. Her eyes stayed dry, but her mouth trembled. The jailhouse door creaked open. In stepped a tall man, broad-shouldered, his boots heavy on the boards. His face was half-shadowed by the brim of a weathered hat, but the left side was marked by a pale scar that ran from above his ear to the edge of his jaw. It pulled faintly when he spoke. "I am Sheriff Yates Norwood," he said. His voice was low, measured. "You are Pruella Vaughn?" She looked up at him, hands folded in her lap. "I am." "I read the charge," he said, stepping closer to the cell. His eyes were the pale gray of dust storms. "You stole a sorrel stallion belonging to a man named Hodges. Worth over $200. "I did not steal anything," she said. He did not speak for a moment. Then he pulled a key from his belt and opened the door. She tensed, ready to be cuffed again or moved. But he only stepped inside and sat across from her on the bench. "I believe you," he said. Pruella blinked. "Why?" He looked at her hands, still raw. "Because Hodges is a liar. And because you do not look like someone who would have made it 50 miles with a stolen horse and no gun." She said nothing. "Where were you last night?" "I was camped by Mesquite Hollow. I have been traveling west since February. I sell fabric, thread, lace. I trade." "You were alone?" "Yes." He nodded once. "You are not the first woman he has tried to pin theft on. But you are the first they brought in." Pruella narrowed her eyes. "So why arrest me at all?" "I was out of town. My deputy acted on the warrant." "I am sorry for that." The apology came easy, but his eyes stayed on her like he was trying to read the parts she had not said. She stared back, steady. "Will you let me go?" she asked. Yates stood. "I will clear your name. But I need to ride to Hodges' ranch and get his statement. It may take 2 days. I will not lock you up again." He looked at her, still waiting. She gave a single nod. "Then come with me," he said. They rode out that afternoon, her on her mule, him on a dark gelding. The land opened up into dry hills and scattered cactus. The sky was wide and cloudless. They camped that night beneath a bluff, a small fire between them. Pruella sat cross-legged, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. Yates sat across from her, quiet, whittling a sliver of wood to a point. "You always believe strangers?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "But I do not like seeing the wrong person in chains." She watched the firelight catch the edge of his scar. "That from a bullet?" "Knife," he said. She did not ask more. He did not offer more. That night, she slept near the fire, her back to the rock wall. She woke once to find him sitting up, watching the darkness. His rifle lay across his lap. She did not speak. But something inside her shifted. A small, quiet thing. By midday the next day, they reached the Hodges ranch. The man came out onto the porch, fat and red-faced, with a shotgun in hand. "I already gave my statement," he said. Yates sat straight in the saddle. "Then give it again." "I saw that woman. She was riding my horse." "No," Pruella interrupted, voice sharp. "You saw a woman with brown hair. That is all. You never saw me." "Sheriff," Hodges began, eyes narrowing. Yates cut him off. "You say she stole your horse. Then where is it?" "She has a mule," No stallion. No saddle but her own. Hodges shifted. Maybe she traded it off. Yates dismounted. Or maybe you are lying again. The threat in his voice was quiet but heavy. Hodges backed up a step. Yates turned to Pruella. Go check the barn. She did. She found the sorrel stallion tied in the back stall, saddle still on, the brand fresh and raw. She came back out. He has it here. Yates walked past Hodges without a word, into the barn. A minute later he returned, hands full of paperwork. Registration. No bill of sale. Just a branded horse and a false report. He looked at Pruella. You are clear. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. They rode back slower than they came. By the second night, they stopped near a river, the sound of rushing water easing the silence between them. She watched him from across the fire, as he peeled off his coat and cleaned his rifle. His scar caught the moonlight. Does it hurt? She asked. He looked up. Only when it rains. What happened? He hesitated, then sat down beside her. 2 years ago. I arrested 3 brothers in Tombstone. Their youngest came at me in the dark with a broken bottle. I lived. He did not. She looked at him, then reached out and touched the edge of the scar with gentle fingers. It suits you. His breath caught just slightly. She let her hand fall. I mean it. He watched her. Why are you alone? I was married once, she said. He died in Kansas. Fever. We had no children. I left after. Started over. He nodded. And you? She asked. I was engaged. Years ago. She left when I became sheriff. Why? He shrugged. She wanted peace. I carried too much trouble. Pruella looked into the fire. Maybe you just had no one to carry it with. Their eyes met. He did not look away. On the 4th morning, they rode into Clearwater. The sky was soft with dawn. Yates helped her down from the mule, his hand warm on her waist. She lingered when he let go. He cleared his throat. You could stay. For a while. She looked at the town. Then at him. I could. There was a long pause. He stepped closer. I would like you to. She nodded. Then I will. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. The general store sat at the corner where the road curved toward the blacksmith's and the old Methodist church. Pruella stood beside a barrel of salt pork, one hand resting lightly on a bolt of calico. It was mid-morning, and the sun streamed in through the front windows, catching the dust in the air. I'd rather trade than spend coin, she said, holding up a spool of dyed thread. French blue. Hard to come by. Esther Lyle, the storekeeper's wife, considered the offer with a thoughtful tilt of her head. She was a woman of firm opinions and sharp eyes, but she measured Pruella without suspicion. You got more like that? A whole case. Esther nodded toward the back room. Bring it round this afternoon. I'll set aside the cloth. Pruella offered a quiet thanks and stepped out onto the boardwalk. The street was quiet except for the rattle of a cart and the soft hammering from the farrier's shop. She adjusted her shawl and turned toward the sheriff's office. Inside, Yates was bent over a ledger. The lantern by his elbow was unlit, but the wick had been trimmed. His coat hung on the peg behind the door, and the room smelled faintly of saddle soap and tobacco that had long since gone cold. I traded thread for fabric, she said as she stepped inside. He looked up. Good deal? Fair. Better than I expected. He closed the ledger and leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. You'll need a place to keep your goods. I can ask around. I already found one, she said. Mrs. Avery rents a small room behind her boarding house. Has a side door and a table large enough to sort by. He nodded once. You settle fast. I've had practice. He watched her for a moment. You plan to stay more than a few days? That depend on the town, she said. And the people in it. He stood, crossed the room, and opened the drawer beneath the window. From it he pulled a rolled map and spread it across the desk. "There's a market in Dry Hollow come next Thursday. You could take your goods there. I'll be riding out that way myself." She stepped closer, studying the faint lines on the page. "How far?" "Day and a half, if the river's low." She ran her fingers over the path traced in pencil. "I'll go." He folded the map again. "Then I'll see you before dawn." As she turned to leave, he spoke again, quiet, almost unsure. "You sleep all right?" "I did," she said, pausing at the threshold. "Better than I have in months." Outside, the light had shifted. She crossed the street slowly, her boots raising soft puffs of dust. A child called out somewhere in the distance, and the bell above the church door told the hour. That evening, with the sun low behind the mesquite trees, she sat in the back room of the boarding house, her hands moving steadily over needle and cloth. She stitched without hurry, the rhythm steady, calming. A knock came at the side door. She rose, wiped her hands on her apron, and opened it. Yates stood there, hat in hand. "I thought you might want this," he said, holding out a folded paper. "Supply lists for the market. Helps to know what folks are low on." She took it gently. "Thank you." He hesitated. "You eating supper alone?" "I was." He glanced toward the far end of the alley, where the lamplighter's glow flickered against the dusk. "There's stew at the station. I could heat another bowl." She stepped back slightly. "Give me 5 minutes." He nodded once and turned without another word. She closed the door, heart beating slow and sure. She did not rush. She changed her blouse, pinned her hair neatly, and washed her hands again. Back at the station, the fire in the small iron stove had been coaxed back to life. 2 bowls sat ready on the table, steam rising from each. He poured coffee into tin cups and sat across from her. They ate in silence for a while, the air quiet but not strained. "When I was a girl," she said softly, "I thought the West would be louder. Gunshots, saloons, men hollering in the street." He lifted a shoulder. "Some towns are. I keep this one from becoming that." She glanced up at him. "You do it well." He didn't answer right away. Then, "You always speak so plain?" "I've learned not to waste words." He looked down at his hands. "I never wanted to wear a badge. My father was a rancher. I was supposed to take over." "What changed?" she asked. He met her gaze. "He died. I was 20. There was trouble in town, and no one to stop it. I stepped in." She studied him for a moment. "You stayed after the trouble passed." "There's always more trouble. Just quieter." She leaned forward slightly. "You ever think of leaving?" His jaw tightened. "Once." "What stopped you?" He looked at her for a long time. "I hadn't yet met you." The silence that followed was full and gentle. She did not look away. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, 2 hearts moved closer, not with haste, but with purpose. The road to Dry Hollow bent through gulches lined with cottonwood and low scrub, the trees just beginning to leaf with the turn of spring. Pruella rode beside Yates in silence for most of the first morning, both of them alert to the land's quiet language, hoofbeats muffled by dust, a hawk's cry banking over the ridge, the sharp scent of creosote warming in the sun. By mid-afternoon, her mule's gait had slowed, so Yates reined in and nodded toward a shaded patch where the bluff cast a long arm over the trail. They dismounted, unsaddling without speaking, their movements practiced and careful. She knelt to check her packs while he fetched water from a narrow stream that gurgled just out of sight. She didn't look up as she spoke. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't taken the badge?" Yates unscrewed the cap on his canteen, filled it, then answered over his shoulder. "My brother still runs cattle up north of Bisbee. I'd have likely joined him. Long days, honest trade. No need to carry a gun every time I step outside." "Why didn't you?" she asked, standing. "I'd already buried too much to walk away from what I could still protect." She watched the way he stood as he spoke, back straight, shoulders level, as if he held something in place by force of will alone. I didn't know you had a brother. He handed her the canteen. We don't talk much. He's a quiet man. Married 2 girls. I visit when I can. She took the water, then sat on a flat rock, letting the warmth soak through her skirt. My sister writes when she remembers. She's in Missouri. Married into a miller's family. 6 children. She can't understand why I'd rather sleep under stars than under a roof. You ever miss that kind of life? I miss being seen as respectable, she said. But I don't miss being spoken over. He sat across from her. You're not easy to talk over. I've had practice. The corner of his mouth lifted, not in amusement, but acknowledgement. They ate beside the stream that evening, using the last of the smoked venison she'd packed. He offered her half of his biscuit without a word. She broke it evenly and passed the piece back. As dusk fell, she unrolled her blanket at a slight distance from his, close but not presumptuous. He didn't question it. The stars came out one by one, and the air cooled to something crisp and clean. He lay on his back, one arm folded beneath his head. What do you want, Pruella? It was not a question of the moment. It was something deeper. She turned on her side, facing him across the space between them. I want to be trusted. I want to build something that's mine. I want to wake up knowing where I'll be the next day. He didn't move, but his voice was low. You could do that in Clearwater. I could, she said. If I had reason enough. He didn't press her. But she saw the way his hand curled lightly around the edge of his blanket, fingers flexing once before stilling. In the morning, fog clung low to the riverbed. They rode in silence again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not distance, just understanding. Dry Hollow was a rougher town than Clearwater. The buildings leaned, and the people leaned harder. Pruella set up her table near the feed store, arranging her wares with a careful eye. She did not speak much, but when she did, her voice carried the kind of calm that made people stop and listen. Yates stood nearby, not hovering, but present. When a ranch hand with too much whiskey on his braith reached for her basket with unsteady hands, Yates was beside him in 2 strides. She said no? The man muttered something, but stepped back. Yates didn't have to touch his gun. He didn't have to raise his voice. Later, as she packed up, she looked over at him. You didn't need to step in. I know, he said. But I wanted to. They started back that afternoon, moving slower with her meal loaded. As the sun dipped behind the hills, she glanced over at him, his jaw dark with the start of a beard, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You've changed, she said. He glanced at her. How so? You're not holding yourself quite so tight. He considered that. Maybe I'm not waiting for the next fight. Maybe you're starting to believe the fight's over. He didn't answer, but she saw the way his gaze softened, just a breath, before he looked ahead again. They camped by a dry wash that night. She lit a small fire while he laid out the blankets. As she stirred the pot of beans, he sat beside her, knees brushing. I've been thinking, he said. She looked at him. I don't want to just watch you build something here. I want to build it with you. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her heart beat slower, heavier. I don't need promises, he added. I just need to know you'll stay. She reached for his hand, resting her fingers lightly over his. I'll stay, she said. And not just because you asked? He turned his hand, curled her fingers into his, and for a long time, they sat like that, firelight flickering against their joined palms, the rest of the world quiet around them. By early May, the mesquite had turned fragrant, and Clearwater's days came longer, stretching into evenings thick with the hum of cicadas. Pruella had moved her wares into the small room behind Mrs. Avery's boarding house, and business had begun to find her. Word passed quietly through the women at church and the hands who rode in from the outlying ranches. The thread lady who knew how to match the exact red of a hem, who could mend a lace cuff finer than it was stitched new. Yates came by most mornings under some pretense, a report to file, a notice to post, but more often than not, he lingered past reason. One morning, He stood in the doorway as she sorted a coil of ribbon by shade, his hat in his hands. "Reckon you'd come with me up through the high pass tomorrow?" he asked, voice low. "There's a parcel of land the county's disputing. I need to mark the boundary." She didn't look up. "You need a witness?" "No. I need company." His honesty sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. She tied off the ribbon and finally met his gaze. "All right," she said. "I'll pack food." They left before the sun crested the hills, riding north where the Gila forked and the land grew steeper. The trail cut through pinyon stands and rock shelves, the air cooler by degrees. At midday, they stopped near a narrow ridge where the wind carried the scent of juniper. He unrolled a map across a flat stone and pointed to the notch between two ridges. "That's the line in question. Folks say the river shifted last year's flood. Moved the border a quarter-mile east." She leaned in to study the markings. "Whose land does it affect?" "Old Man Keller's. He passed last winter, left no kin. Now the county wants to fold it under tax claim. But I knew the line before the river turned. I'll mark it true." She watched him as he spoke, careful, deliberate, not a man seeking credit but simply doing what was right. "You ever think of taking land for yourself?" she asked. "Thought about it," he said. "Back in my 20s. Before the badge. I cleared a small patch above Bisbee once. Built a fence. But I never finished the house." "Why not?" He looked out across the valley, the wind catching the edge of his coat. "Didn't feel like mine." She didn't press him further, just passed him a strip of dried apple and sat beside him on the rock. The view stretched wide beneath them, sunstruck stone, scattered brush, and the faint, distant gleam of water. He turned his head slightly. "If I'd built something now, I'd want it to be with someone who could see it through." She didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, brushing her hair against her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear, eyes still on the land. "I've stitched 100 hems for other people's lives," she said quietly. "Seems time I put my hand to my own." He nodded, slow and quiet, and in that pause something shifted between them, not sudden, not grand, but rooted. Like a seed catching deep in good soil. On the ride back, they met a wagon stuck in the wash, the wheel sunk to its axle in soft earth. A wiry man stood beside it, his wife seated with a baby in her arms, both looking too worn for argument. Yates dismounted without needing a word. Pruella followed. He braced the wheel while she fetched stones to wedge under the rim. The man looked on, stunned, as the sheriff and a stranger woman worked in tandem, boots thick with mud. When the wagon finally rocked free, the woman on the bench began to cry, low and sudden. Pruella climbed up, touched her shoulder gently. "You're all right now," she said. "You've made it this far." The woman nodded, clutching the child tighter. They rode the rest of the way to Clearwater with little said between them. When they reached town, the sky was gold-washed and the streets nearly empty. Yates walked her mule the last block to the boarding house, his hand steady on the lead. At her door, he paused. "I've been thinking," he said, voice rougher than usual. "I don't want to keep riding home alone." She set her hand lightly against his chest. "Then don't." He didn't kiss her, not yet. He only closed his eyes for a moment, as though something inside him finally rested. And she stepped inside with the quiet certainty that her days of wandering had ended. In the weeks that followed their ride through the high pass, Clearwater began to shift in small, perceptible ways. The town still rose with dawn and quieted with dusk, but where Pruella walked, people nodded now. Where she stopped, doors opened. Her presence had rooted itself not through spectacle, but through steady kindness and the kind of competence that left no room for doubt. Children came to her for thread to mend dolls, and men tipped their hats not out of habit, but respect. Yates had taken to bringing her ledgers from the town office, which she helped him copy by lantern light. He watched her fingers move across the page with a quiet awe he never said aloud. She never asked him to stay, and he never waited for an invitation. He simply remained until the last candle flickered low. One afternoon, she stood outside her workroom, hands dusted with flour from the bread she'd been helping Mrs. Avery knead. A man on horseback approached from the southern road, his coat worn thin, the look of long travel on him. He dismounted stiffly and asked for the sheriff. Yates came out from the office with a rifle slung over one shoulder, expression already wary. Pruella listened from the stoop, arms folded across her apron. The man cleared his throat. "My name's Tobias Keller. That land up past the ridge, my father left it to me. I only just now heard he passed. Word travels slow when you're working cattle in Texas." Yates didn't answer right away. "You have proof of claim?" Tobias pulled a folded will from his coat. "Signed and witnessed." Yates read it slowly, then nodded. "The county hasn't filed its claim yet." "You're within your right." Pruella stepped down from the stoop. "You plan to stay on it?" "If I can. I've got a wife, 2 boys. We're camped outside town." Yates looked toward her. "Think Mrs. Avery might have a corner for them while they get settled?" "She might," Pruella said. "But they'll need a stove and a roof by next frost." Tobias looked relieved. "I can raise the walls if I've got help." The next morning, Yates knocked just after first light. He carried an axe in one hand and a wrapped biscuit in the other. "You coming?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. She packed a tin of lard, a spool of waxed thread, and her thickest gloves. The whole town turned out by the end of the week. Boards were hewn, nails hammered, beams lifted. Pruella stitched curtains from old grain sacks and taught Keller's wife how to patch a torn quilt. Yates laid the hearthstone himself, hands blistered by evening. When the cabin stood solid and square, Keller's boys carved their initials into the doorframe. Pruella watched them, her fingers tucked into Yates's palm. That night, they sat on the porch of her room behind the boarding house. The stars were close and sharp, the air holding the last warmth of day. He leaned back against the railing, his shoulder brushing hers. "You ever think about having land of your own?" he asked. "I do," she said. "And if you had it? I'd want a table big enough for more than one plate. A root cellar. A porch just like this." He tilted his head toward her. "You'd want someone to build it with?" She met his eyes. "I'd want you." He didn't reach for her, he simply leaned in, slow and certain, until their lips met. It wasn't the first time their hands had touched, or the first time their hearts had leaned toward each other. But it was the first kiss, and it carried the quiet weight of all the hours they'd stood side by side, unspoken things now made real. In the weeks that followed, she moved out of the boarding house. They built a small house near the riverbank, just past the cottonwood stand. He took care to notch each beam straight. She planted rosemary by the door. He kept wearing the badge, but less like a burden and more like something earned. She kept sewing, but now from the porch, where light spilled over her lap and the sound of his boots always found its way home. When summer came, they held a gathering beneath the trees. Esther Lau brought peach preserves. The preacher from the next town over said the words. They stood hand in hand, both in their best, neither needing to say much. He kissed her under the cottonwoods, and the town clapped like thunder. Years passed. The house grew in small ways: a second chair, a window facing east, a shelf of books she found in trade. A girl named Clara was born one spring, with her mother's quiet eyes and her father's steady grip. She grew up with dust on her boots and stories told over the fire. Every day, Yates came home by sundown, and every day, Pruella looked up and smiled like it was still the first time. They lived long. They lived well. And nothing they built ever fell.